Sometimes life breaks us so completely that we forget what it feels like to hope. Sometimes we build walls so high around our hearts that we can't imagine anyone ever climbing over them again. Samuel Fisher had been living in the shadows of grief for 3 years. His small Amish farm in Pennsylvania felt more like a prison than a home. Each morning brought the same emptiness, the same questions without answers. His community tried to reach him, but Samuel had pulled away from everyone and everything that once brought him joy. Then one stormy night, a homeless little girl appeared at his gate. She was soaked to the bone and had nowhere else to go. Against his better judgment, Samuel let her in. What he didn't know was that this scared, broken child would be the one to teach him how to live again. But could two wounded souls really heal each other? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the windows of Samuel Fisher's farmhouse with a persistence that matched his own stubborn grief. He sat in his kitchen, staring at the hand-carved wooden cross that hung on the wall, a cross he'd made with his own hands 15 years ago, when his faith ran as deep as the roots of the old oak tree in his front yard. Now it seemed to mock him, a reminder of prayers that went unanswered and a God who had turned his face away. 3 years. 3 long years since the accident that had torn his world apart like a piece of paper. The details still haunted his dreams. The wet roads, the speeding car that ran the stop sign, the terrible sound of splintering wood and screaming horses. In one violent moment, Martha and little Jacob had been taken from him, leaving behind only memories and an emptiness so vast it seemed to swallow everything good in his life. Before the accident, this house had been filled with laughter. Martha's gentle humming would drift from the kitchen as she prepared their meals, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. Jacob, barely 7 years old, would race through the rooms with his wooden toy horse, making clip-clop sounds as he pretended to be a real Amish farmer driving his team. The boy had Martha's smile and Samuel's stubborn streak, a combination that had filled their days with joy and their evenings with grateful prayers. Samuel remembered how Martha would sit by Jacob's bedside each night, reading him stories from the old German Bible, her voice soft and melodic. The boy would drift off to sleep, clutching that wooden horse Samuel had carved for his 5th birthday, his small fingers wrapped around the toy as if it might carry him into dreams of adventure. Those were the days when Samuel's faith felt as solid as the barn beams he'd raised with his own hands, when he believed that God's plan was good and that his family was blessed beyond measure. The community had tried to help him through his grief. Bishop Eli, a man whose wisdom had guided their district for over 2 decades, had spent countless hours sitting on Samuel's porch, speaking gently about God's mysterious ways and the promise of eternal reunion. Ruth Yoder, his closest neighbor, had brought casseroles and offers of companionship, her kind eyes always filled with concern for his well-being. Isaac Stoltzfus, his longtime friend since their school days, had attempted to draw him back into the rhythm of community life with invitations to barn raisings and harvest celebrations. But Samuel had pulled away from all of it. The communal meals felt hollow without Martha's presence beside him. The children's laughter at community gatherings only reminded him of Jacob's absence. Even the Sunday services, once the cornerstone of his week, became painful endurance tests where every hymn seemed to echo with memories of his wife's sweet voice, and every sermon felt like salt in an open wound. His farm, once a source of pride and purpose, had become simply a means of survival. He performed the necessary tasks, milking the 3 cows, collecting eggs from the dozen hens, tending to the vegetable garden that Martha had lovingly planted, but the joy had gone out of the work. The fields that had once represented hope for the future now felt like a burden he carried alone. The empty spaces at his dinner table seemed to grow larger with each passing day, and the silence in his house pressed down on him like a physical weight. The wooden cross on his kitchen wall had become a symbol of his struggle with God. Some days he wanted to take it down, to remove this reminder of a faith that had failed to protect the people he loved most. Other days he stared at it for hours, pleading silently for understanding, for some sign that his suffering had meaning. But the cross remained silent, offering neither comfort nor answers, just like the God who had allowed his world to crumble. Tonight was no different from any other. The storm that had been building all day finally unleashed its fury, sending sheets of rain across his farmland and rattling the windows with gusts of wind. Samuel sat at his kitchen table, picking at a simple supper of bread and cold meat, his Bible open but unread beside his plate. The loneliness felt particularly heavy this evening, pressing down on his shoulders like a yoke he couldn't remove. It was then that he saw her, a small figure standing at his front gate, barely visible through the driving rain. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, that grief and isolation had finally begun to affect his mind. But as he peered through the storm, he could make out the unmistakable shape of a child, small and fragile, standing in the downpour without any apparent shelter. Samuel's first instinct was to close the curtains and pretend he hadn't seen anything. He had built his walls high for a reason, and letting anyone, especially a child, into his carefully guarded solitude felt dangerous. Children reminded him too much of Jacob, of the laughter and innocence that had been stolen from his life. But something about the small figure's stillness, the way she stood there as if she had nowhere else to go, tugged at something deep within him. He watched for several more minutes, hoping she would move on, find someone else's door to knock on. But she remained there, a small sentinel in the storm, and Samuel felt his resolve beginning to weaken. Despite all his efforts to harden his heart, he couldn't ignore the sight of a child alone in such weather. Martha would never have forgiven him for turning away someone in need, especially not a little one who appeared to be in distress. With a heavy sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, Samuel rose from his chair and made his way to the front door. His hand hesitated on the handle for a moment, knowing that once he opened it, once he allowed this stranger into his sanctuary of grief, something would change. But the memory of Martha's gentle voice, reminding him that kindness was the cornerstone of their faith, finally moved him to turn the handle and step out into the storm. The little girl was perhaps 10 years old, though it was hard to tell in the dim light and through the rain that plastered her dark hair to her head. Her clothes were soaked through, and she was shivering violently, her thin arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to stay warm. When she saw Samuel emerge from the house, her eyes, large and dark and filled with a wariness that seemed far too old for her years, met his with a mixture of hope and fear. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm, "I don't have anywhere else to go." Samuel felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in the armor of grief he'd worn for 3 years. This child, with her haunted eyes and desperate plea, reminded him not just of Jacob, but of his own human responsibility to show mercy to those in need. Every instinct told him to send her away, to direct her to Bishop Eli's house, or to the Yoders, who were better equipped to deal with such situations. But looking at her standing there in the rain, so small and vulnerable, he found he couldn't form the words of refusal. "Come inside," he heard himself saying, the words seeming to come from somewhere beyond his conscious mind. "You'll catch your death out here." The girl's relief was palpable as she hurried toward the house, her wet shoes squelching in the muddy yard. Samuel held the door open for her, and as she passed into the warm, dry sanctuary of his kitchen, he caught the scent of rain and something else, the unmistakable smell of someone who had been living rough, who had known hunger and fear and uncertainty. As she stood dripping on his kitchen floor, Samuel felt the weight of the decision he'd just made. This wasn't just about offering temporary shelter from a storm. This was about allowing another human being into the carefully constructed fortress of his grief, about risking the possibility that caring about someone else's welfare might crack. The protective shell he'd built around his heart. The wooden cross on his wall seemed to look down on them both, and for the first time in 3 years, Samuel wondered if perhaps God hadn't abandoned him after all. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself was trying to wash away the drama of the previous evening. Samuel woke earlier than usual, his sleep having been fitful and interrupted by the awareness of another presence in his house. For a moment, lying in his bed and listening to the familiar sounds of his farm awakening, he wondered if the events of the night before had been a dream. But the sound of soft footsteps in his kitchen confirmed that the little girl was real, and that his carefully ordered solitude had been irrevocably disrupted. He found her standing in front of the mantel in his sitting room, studying the collection of photographs that Martha had arranged there so many years ago. The girl had changed out of her wet clothes into an old shirt of Jacob's that Samuel had given her the night before. It hung on her small frame like a tent, but it was dry and warm. Her dark hair had dried into soft waves that framed a face that was thin but not unkind, marked by experiences that no child should have to endure. "Is this your family?" she asked without turning around, her voice carrying a wistfulness that made Samuel's chest tighten. He approached slowly, as if she were a wild creature that might bolt at any sudden movement. "Yes," he said quietly, stopping beside her to look at the photographs he hadn't been able to bear examining for months. There was Martha on their wedding day, radiant in her simple white dress, her blue eyes sparkling with joy and promise. There was Jacob at 6, grinning gap-toothed at the camera, while holding a newborn calf. There was the 3 of them together at last year's harvest festival, Martha's arm around Samuel's waist, Jacob perched on his shoulders, all of them laughing at something outside the frame. "They look happy," the girl observed, and there was something in her tone. Not envy exactly, but a deep longing that spoke of someone who had never known that kind of unconditional love. "They were," Samuel replied, his voice thick with emotion. "We were." The girl turned to look at him then, and he was struck by the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she seemed to see straight through to the heart of his pain. What happened to them? The question hung in the air between them like a bridge that Samuel could either cross or burn. For 3 years he had refused to speak about the accident to anyone, had shut down every well-meaning attempt by his community to help him process his grief. But something about this child's direct gaze, the way she asked without pity or awkwardness, made him want to answer honestly. "There was an accident," he said, settling into his old rocking chair and gesturing for her to sit on the small stool nearby. 3 years ago, they were coming back from town in our buggy when a car ran a stop sign. The driver was drinking. He paused, the familiar weight of those words settling over him like a heavy blanket. "They didn't suffer," he added, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "It was simply what he needed to believe." The girl nodded, solemnly, as if she understood loss in ways that children shouldn't. "I'm sorry," she said, and the simple sincerity of her words touched something in Samuel that had been frozen for years. "It must hurt a lot." "It does," Samuel admitted, surprised by his own honesty. Every day, they sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 wounded souls recognizing something kindred in each other. Finally, the girl spoke again. "My name is Emma," she said. "Emma Louise Patterson, at least that's what the papers say. I don't remember much from before." "Before what?" Samuel asked gently. Emma's thin shoulders rose and fell in a shrug that tried to appear casual, but couldn't hide the pain behind it. "Before the foster homes, before the streets, before I had to learn to take care of myself." She looked down at her hands, which were folded in her lap. "I've been walking for 3 days trying to find somewhere safe. When I saw your light last night and the storm got so bad, I thought maybe—" She trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Samuel felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight bands of grief that had constricted his breathing for so long. This child had been walking for days, alone and afraid, looking for safety in a world that had clearly failed to protect her. The parallels to his own search for peace, his own desperate need for refuge from the storms of life, were not lost on him. "How old are you, Emma?" he asked. 10, she replied. "I think. The foster families never seemed real sure about my birthday. 10 years old, the same age Jacob would have been now if he had lived." Samuel felt his hands tremble slightly as he absorbed this information, as if the universe was playing some cosmic joke on him, offering him a child the same age as the one he had lost. But looking at Emma's serious face, at the way she carried herself with a maturity born of necessity rather than choice, he saw not a replacement for Jacob, but a soul in need of the same kind of love and protection his son had once received. "Where are your parents?" Samuel asked, though he suspected from her earlier words that the answer would not be simple. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and Samuel could see her weighing how much to tell him, how much truth she could trust him with. Finally, she reached into the pocket of the jacket she'd been wearing the night before and pulled out a torn photograph. It showed a woman with Emma's dark hair and eyes, but the woman's face was hard, marked by lines of bitterness and disappointment. "This is my mother," Emma said, handing him the photograph. "At least, the woman who gave birth to me. I don't really remember her much. She gave me to the state when I was little, said she couldn't take care of me." She paused, her young voice taking on a matter-of-fact tone that broke Samuel's heart. "I've been in 7 different homes since then. Some were okay, some weren't. The last one," she stopped, shaking her head. "I couldn't stay there anymore, so I left." Samuel studied the damaged photograph, noting how carefully Emma had preserved it despite its worn condition. This torn picture was likely one of the few connections she had to her past, to any sense of identity or belonging. The woman in the photo looked young, probably not much older than Emma was now when she'd given birth, but there was something in her expression that spoke of choices made from desperation rather than love. "You've been on your own for 3 days?" Samuel asked, trying to keep the concern out of his voice. "I'm good at taking care of myself," Emma said, and there was a defensive pride in her words. "I know how to find food, how to stay warm, how to stay hidden when I need to. I wasn't planning to stay anywhere long. I just needed to get away from the city, from the people who were looking for me." "People were looking for you?" Emma's face closed off slightly, and Samuel could see her retreat into the protective shell that street children learn to develop. "It's complicated," she said. "Sometimes when you see things you're not supposed to see, people don't want you talking about it." The implication of her words hit Samuel like a cold wind. This child hadn't just run away from a bad foster situation. She was running from something dangerous, something that had put her life at risk. The protective instincts that had been dormant in him for 3 years suddenly roared to life, and he felt a fierce determination to keep this vulnerable child safe, regardless of what had brought her to his door. "Emma," he said carefully, "I need you to know that you're safe here. Whatever happened before, whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone anymore." The girl's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away, as if she'd learned long ago that crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I'm not the kind of kid people want to keep. I've heard it before. Social workers, foster parents, they all say the same thing at first, but then they find out how much trouble comes with me, and they change their minds." Samuel felt his heart break for this child who had learned to expect abandonment, who had been failed by every adult system that should have protected her. Without thinking, he reached out and gently touched her small hand. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and as the words left his mouth, he realized they were true. "And neither are you, if you don't want to." Emma looked up at him with hope and fear warring in her dark eyes. "You mean it?" "I mean it," Samuel said, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with his own grief and everything to do with protecting someone else. "We'll figure out the rest as we go along." As Emma's tentative smile broke across her face like sunshine after a storm, Samuel realized that his carefully constructed walls of isolation were crumbling. This broken child had done something that 3 years of counseling from Bishop Eli and countless casseroles from concerned neighbors had failed to accomplish. She had given him a reason to care about someone other than himself, a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, healing was possible after all. The days that followed Emma's arrival fell into a rhythm that surprised Samuel with its naturalness. He had expected awkwardness, the kind of stilted interactions that come when strangers are forced into close quarters. Instead, he found himself settling into patterns of care and responsibility that felt both foreign and familiar, like putting on a coat that had hung unused in a closet for years. Emma proved to be an eager student in the ways of farm life. She followed Samuel through his morning chores with the focused attention of someone who had learned early that understanding her environment was crucial to survival. When he showed her how to collect eggs from the henhouse, she listened carefully to his instructions about moving slowly and speaking softly to avoid startling the birds. When he taught her the proper way to milk Bessie, his gentlest cow, she watched his hands with the intensity of someone memorizing a life skill. "Why do you talk to them?" Emma asked on her 3rd morning at the farm, as she watched Samuel speak quietly to the animals during their morning routines. Samuel paused in his brushing of old Ned, his draft horse, and considered the question. "All God's creatures deserve respect," he said finally. "They can't understand our words, but they can sense our intentions. When we speak kindly to them, when we show them care, they know they're safe with us." Emma nodded thoughtfully, and Samuel noticed how she began incorporating gentle words into her own interactions with the animals. She had a natural gift with them, he observed. The chickens didn't scatter when she approached, and even Bessie, who could be skittish with strangers, seemed to accept Emma's presence with unusual calm. It was in the kitchen that Emma's presence most dramatically changed the texture of Samuel's daily life. For 3 years, his meals had been solitary affairs, simple combinations of bread, cheese, and whatever vegetables he could manage from Martha's neglected garden. But with Emma there, the kitchen came alive again in ways he hadn't expected. He found Martha's old recipe book one afternoon, the pages yellowed with age and marked with flour fingerprints from years of use. Emma discovered him sitting at the kitchen table, the book open before him, his weathered fingers tracing the careful script of his wife's handwriting. "What's that?" Emma asked, settling into the chair across from him. "Recipes," Samuel said, his voice thick with memory. "My wife Martha wrote down all her favorite dishes, the ones her mother taught her, the ones she learned from the other women in our community. I haven't looked at this book since—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Emma leaned forward, studying the open page. "Chouflée pie," she read slowly. "That sounds interesting. What's in it?" Samuel found himself explaining the traditional Pennsylvania Dutch dessert, how the molasses filling was covered with a sweet crumb topping, how Martha used to make it for special occasions and Sunday dinners. As he spoke, he could almost smell the pie baking in Martha's oven, could almost hear her humming as she worked. "Could we make it?" Emma asked tentatively. "I'd like to learn how." The request caught Samuel off guard. He hadn't baked anything. Since Martha's death, hadn't seen any point in creating foods meant to be shared when he had no one to share them with. But looking at Emma's hopeful face, he found himself nodding. They spent the afternoon working together in the kitchen. Emma carefully measuring ingredients while Samuel guided her through each step of the process. Her small hands mixed the crumb topping while he prepared the molasses filling. And as they worked, Samuel found himself talking, really talking, for the first time in years. He told her about Martha's perfectionism in the kitchen, how she would remake an entire batch of bread if the loaves weren't exactly right. He shared stories about Jacob's attempts to help with baking, how the boy had once helped by adding salt instead of sugar to a cake batter, creating a dessert so inedible that even the pigs had refused it. Emma laughed at his stories, and the sound of her laughter seemed to chase away some of the shadows that had settled over the house. As the pie baked, filling the kitchen with its sweet aroma, Samuel watched Emma explore the rest of Martha's recipe. Collection. She asked questions about ingredients she didn't recognize, about techniques she'd never seen before. Her curiosity was infectious, and Samuel found himself remembering the joy that cooking had once brought to his household. "In my last foster home," Emma said quietly as they waited for the pie to finish, "the mother didn't cook much. She said it was too much trouble for temporary kids. We mostly ate things from boxes and cans." She looked up at Samuel with something like wonder in her eyes. "I never knew food could smell like this when it's being made with care." Samuel felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it wasn't just grief. It was anger on behalf of this child who had been denied so many simple pleasures that should be every child's birthright. "Food made with love always tastes better," he said. "Martha used to say that the most important ingredient in any recipe was the care you put into making it." When the pie came out of the oven, golden brown and perfectly formed, Emma clapped her hands with delight. They let it cool while they shared a simple supper of soup and bread, and then, as the sun began to set, they each had a slice of the choufle pie. Emma's eyes closed as she took her first bite, and the expression of pure pleasure on her face was worth every moment of the emotional difficulty Samuel had experienced in returning to Martha's recipes. "This is the most delicious thing I've ever tasted," Emma declared, and Samuel felt a warm glow of pride that had nothing to do with his own skills and everything to do with the joy of sharing something meaningful with someone who truly appreciated. The evening routine they established was perhaps the most precious part of their new life together. After the dishes were washed and put away, after the animals were settled for the night, Samuel and Emma would sit on the front porch in the gathering dusk. Samuel had pulled Jacob's old stool from the barn, and Emma would sit there while he settled into his rocking chair, the one Martha had given him for his 40th birthday. At first, their conversations were simple. Emma would ask about the sounds of the farm at night, about the way the stars looked different in the country than they had in the city. But gradually, their talks deepened. Emma began sharing fragments of her life before Samuel, carefully chosen pieces of her history that painted a picture of resilience in the face of abandonment. She told him about a foster mother who had been kind but overwhelmed, who had 7 children in her care and couldn't give individual attention to any of them. She described a group home where the older kids had looked out for the younger ones, teaching them survival skills that no child should need to know. She spoke about teachers who had tried to help, social workers who had made promises they couldn't keep, and the gradual realization that she could only truly depend on herself. "I used to dream about having a real family," Emma said one evening, her voice soft in the growing darkness. "Not just people who were paid to take care of me, but people who actually wanted me around. I used to make up stories about parents who would teach me things and take me places and remember my birthday without having to check my file." Samuel felt his heart constrict as he listened to her words. Here was a child who had been denied the most basic human need, the need to belong, to be cherished for her own sake rather than as a duty or obligation. He thought about Jacob, who had never known a day when his place in their family was uncertain, who had fallen asleep every night secure in the knowledge that he was loved completely and unconditionally. "What kind of things did you dream about doing with this family?" Samuel asked gently. Emma was quiet for a moment, as if she was debating whether to share such precious fantasies. "Regular things," she said finally, "like learning to bake cookies for Christmas, or having someone teach me to ride a bike, or having a garden where we grew vegetables together. I dreamed about sitting on a porch like this and talking about the day, about feeling safe enough to fall asleep without wondering if I'd have to leave in the morning. Nearness station. Samuel felt tears prick at his eyes as he realized that Emma had just described a life very much like the one he was offering her, however unintentionally. The simple rhythms of farm life, the daily chores performed together, the evening conversations on the porch, these were the very things she had dreamed about, and they were becoming reality in ways neither of them had expected. "Emma," he said carefully, "what if this didn't have to be temporary? What if this could be your real life, your real home?" Emma turned to look at him, and even in the dim light he could see the hope and fear battling in her expression. "People always say things like that at first," she whispered, "but then they realize how much work it is, how much trouble comes with keeping someone like me around." "Someone like you," Samuel repeated. "You mean someone brave enough to survive on their own, smart enough to find safety when they need it, kind enough to help an old man remember how to laugh again." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I have nightmares," she said. "Sometimes I wake up screaming. I don't know how to act around other kids my age because I've never stayed anywhere long enough to make real friends. I'm behind in school because I've missed so much. And there are people, bad people, who might come looking for me someday." Samuel reached over and gently took her small hand in his weathered one. "We all have our burdens to carry," he said. "I have nightmares, too, about the accident, about losing the people I loved. I don't know how to be around people anymore because I've been alone for so long, and I'm behind in living because I've spent 3 years hiding from life." He squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe broken people are exactly what each other needs." As they sat together in the comfortable darkness, Samuel realized that something fundamental had shifted in his relationship with both grief and hope. For the first time since Martha and Jacob's death, he was looking forward to tomorrow, not because his pain had diminished, but because he had found a reason to care about someone else's happiness. Emma had given him a purpose beyond his own sorrow, and in doing so, she had started a healing process he hadn't believed was possible. The wooden cross in his kitchen no longer seemed like a mockery of his faith. Instead, it was beginning to feel like a promise, not that life would be without pain, but that love could still grow in the midst of loss, that families could be formed not just by blood but by choice, and that sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as unexpected responsibilities. It was on a quiet Thursday morning, as Samuel watched Emma chase escaped chickens around the yard with a determination that reminded him so much of Jacob, it made his chest ache, that he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The sight of her laughing as she finally cornered Henrietta, the most stubborn of his hens, and the way she gently scooped the bird up while murmuring apologies for the chase, convinced him that it was time to share something he had kept locked away for 3 years. After the morning chores were finished and they had settled into the kitchen for their midday meal, Samuel excused himself and climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor. His footsteps felt heavy as he approached Jacob's room, a space he had avoided since the day he had closed the door and turned the key, unable to bear the sight of his son's belongings, waiting for a child who would never return. The door opened, with a creak that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet house. The room was exactly as Jacob had left it that morning 3 years ago. The small bed, neatly made with Martha's careful hands, the wooden toys arranged on the shelf Samuel had built into the wall, the simple clothes folded in the dresser drawers. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the window, and the air held that peculiar stillness of a space waiting for life to return to it. Samuel's eyes went immediately to the shelf where Jacob's most treasured possession sat waiting. The wooden horse, carved from a piece of oak that had fallen in a storm, had been Samuel's gift to the boy on his 5th birthday. He had spent weeks working on it in the evenings after Jacob was asleep, carefully shaping the proud head and flowing mane, smoothing the body until it was perfect for small hands to hold. Jacob had named the horse Thunder, and had carried it with him everywhere, creating elaborate adventures and stories that had filled their evenings with laughter. Samuel picked up the toy with reverent hands, feeling the familiar weight of it. the smoothness of the wood that had been polished by years of loving attention. For a moment, he was overwhelmed by the memory of Jacob's joy when he had first received the gift, the way the boy's face had lit up with wonder and delight. The horse seemed to hold all of Jacob's innocence and happiness within its carved form, and Samuel had to steady himself against the doorframe as grief crashed over him anew. But as he stood there holding his son's treasured toy, Samuel realized that his grief was no longer the sharp, cutting pain it had once been. Instead, it had transformed into something softer, a deep, abiding love for the child he had lost, mixed with gratitude for the time they had shared together. And underneath that love, he felt something else growing, the desire to honor Jacob's memory by loving another child who desperately needed what Jacob had always taken for granted. When Samuel returned to the kitchen carrying the wooden horse, Emma looked up from the book she was reading, one of Martha's old cookbooks that she had been studying with the dedication of a scholar. Her eyes immediately fixed on the toy in his hands, and Samuel could see her quick mind processing what this object meant, understanding instinctively that he was sharing something precious and painful. "This was Jacob's," Samuel said simply, settling into the chair beside her at the kitchen table. "I made it for him when he turned 5. He carried it everywhere, used to pretend he was riding across great meadows and through deep forests." Emma reached out tentatively, then pulled her hand back, as if she understood that the toy was too valuable to be handled casually. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You can see how much love went into making it." Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "He would have liked you," he said. Jacob was always drawn to people who had interesting stories to tell, and he had a fierce sense of justice. He would have been angry that you had to take care of yourself for so long, and he would have wanted to share everything he had to make up for it. "He sounds like he was a special little boy," Emma said, her voice full of the kind of reverence children reserve for stories about other children who were loved completely. "He was," Samuel agreed. "But so are you, Emma, and I think—" He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I think Jacob would have wanted his things to bring joy to another child who needed them. I think he would have been happy to know that his room could be a safe place for someone who had never had a room of their own." Emma's eyes widened as she began to understand what Samuel was offering. "You mean you want me to have his room?" "I want you to have a home," Samuel corrected gently. "A real home, where your things can stay put, where you can make plans for tomorrow because you know tomorrow will still be here. Jacob's room is part of that. But more than that, I want you to be part of this family, such as it is." Tears began to flow down Emma's cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. Instead, she stared at the wooden horse as if it were the most precious thing she had ever seen. "I don't know how to be part of a family," she whispered. "What if I do it wrong?" Samuel reached across the table and gently placed the wooden horse in her small hands. As her fingers closed around it, he felt something shift in his heart, a sense of rightness that he hadn't experienced in years. "There's no wrong way to be loved, Emma, and there's no wrong way to love back. We'll figure it out together, one day at a time." Emma held the horse against her chest, and Samuel could see her struggling to accept the magnitude of what he was offering. "What about your community?" she asked. "What will they think about you keeping an English girl?" The question was more perceptive than Samuel had expected, and it forced him to confront something he had been trying to avoid thinking about. His Amish community, while fundamentally kind and caring, was also deeply traditional and suspicious of outside influences. Taking in a child from the English world, especially one with no clear connections or background, would raise questions and concerns that would be difficult to navigate. "The community will have their opinions," Samuel said honestly. "Some will understand that we're called to care for those in need. Others will worry about the complications that come with bringing an outsider into our way of life. But Emma," he reached over and gently touched her hand, "their opinions don't matter as much as what's right. And keeping you safe, giving you a home where you can grow and learn and be loved, that's what's right. Even as he spoke the words, Samuel knew that the path ahead would not be easy. Bishop Eli would have concerns about the precedent of taking in a child without going through proper channels. The other families would wonder about Emma's influence on their own children, about whether her experiences in the English world would make her a disruptive presence. There would be practical questions about her education, her integration into their way of life, her future within their community. But looking at Emma's face, at the hope and gratitude shining in her eyes, Samuel felt a strength he hadn't possessed in years. This child needed protection, needed love, needed someone to stand up for her right to safety and belonging. If his community couldn't understand that, then perhaps it was time for him to find the courage to stand alone when necessary. "There's something else," Emma said quietly, her fingers still wrapped around Jacob's wooden horse. "Something I haven't told you about why I had to leave the city." Samuel felt a chill of apprehension, but he kept his voice steady. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Emma took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for a difficult confession. "In my last foster home, there was a man, the foster father's brother. He came around a lot, and he wasn't a good person. He did things that scared the other kids, things that made us afraid to be alone with him." She looked down at her hands, unable to meet Samuel's eyes. "One night, I saw him with some other men, doing something they shouldn't have been doing. They were moving packages, talking about money and territories, and what would happen to people who got in their way. I didn't mean to see it, but I was trying to sneak to the kitchen for some food, and they were in the garage." Samuel felt a cold fear settle in his stomach. "Did they know you saw them?" Emma nodded miserably. "The foster father's brother saw me when I was trying to get back upstairs. He told me that if I ever said anything about what I had seen, bad things would happen to me and to any family that tried to help me. He said they had ways of finding people who caused problems, even if those people tried to hide." The full implications of Emma's words hit Samuel like a physical blow. This child wasn't just running from a bad foster situation. She was running from people who would hurt her to protect their criminal activities. By taking her in, by offering her sanctuary, he was potentially putting both of them in danger from people who had no regard for the sanctity of life or the innocence of children. But even as fear coursed through him, Samuel felt his protective instincts roar to life with a strength that surprised him. The idea of anyone threatening this vulnerable child, of using fear to silence someone who had already suffered so much, filled him with a righteous anger that burned away his apprehension. "Emma," he said firmly, "listen to me carefully. Those men, they have no power over you here. This is your home now, your sanctuary, and I will not let anyone hurt you. Do you understand me?" Emma looked up at him with a mixture of hope and terror. "But what if they find me? What if they come here and hurt you because you're helping me?" Samuel thought of Martha and Jacob, of how powerless he had felt when faced with their sudden, senseless deaths. He thought of the 3 years he had spent, hiding from life, paralyzed by grief and fear of further loss. But looking at Emma, this brave, broken child who had entrusted him with her deepest fears, he realized that hiding was no longer an option. Some things were worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. "Then we'll be ready for them," Samuel said, with a calm certainty that came from somewhere deep within him. "And Emma, you're not alone anymore. Whatever comes, whatever we have to face, we'll face it together. That's what families do." As Emma finally smiled through her tears, still clutching Jacob's wooden horse like a talisman of hope, Samuel felt the last of his walls crumble away. He had found his purpose again, his reason for living, and it came in the form of a 10-year-old girl who needed him as much as he needed her. The healing that had begun with her arrival was accelerating now, transforming them both from broken individuals into something stronger, a family forged not by blood, but by choice, commitment, and the fierce determination to protect what mattered most. The morning sun cast long shadows across Samuel's kitchen table as he stared at the official-looking envelope that had appeared in his mailbox during the night. No postmark, no return address, just his name written in block letters that seemed designed to avoid identification. Emma sat across from him, her small hands wrapped around a mug of warm milk, her dark eyes fixed on his face with the kind of alertness that came from years of reading adult moods for signs of danger. "What is it?" she asked quietly, though something in her posture suggested she already suspected the answer. Samuel's weathered fingers trembled slightly as he opened the envelope and extracted the contents. What he found made his blood run cold. Photographs of Emma and him together on his farm, taken with a telephoto lens from a distance that suggested careful surveillance. There she was, feeding the chickens in the yard. There they were, sitting together on the front porch. And finally, a clear shot of Emma's face as she looked directly toward the camera, as if she had sensed being watched. Beneath the photographs was a single sheet of paper with a message typed in the same anonymous block letters. "We know where she is. We know where you are. Send her back to the city or face the consequences. This is your only warning." Emma's sharp intake of breath told Samuel that she had seen enough of the contents to understand their meaning. She set down her milk, with hands that shook, despite her obvious efforts to appear calm. "They found me," she whispered, and her voice carried a depth of resignation that no child should ever have to feel. "Yes," Samuel said, folding the papers carefully and setting them aside. His voice was steady, calmer than he felt. "But finding you and taking you are two very different things." Emma looked at him with eyes that held too much knowledge of the world's cruelties. "Samuel, you don't understand. These aren't the kind of people who make threats they don't intend to keep. They have money, they have connections, and they don't care about rules or laws or innocent people who get in their way." She stood up from the table, already moving toward the door. "I have to leave. I can't let them hurt you because of me." "Sit down," Samuel said firmly, and something in his tone made Emma pause mid-step. "We're not running, and we're not giving up. There are things about me you don't know, Emma, things from my past that might surprise you." Reluctantly, Emma returned to her chair, but her body remained tense, poised for flight. Samuel rose and walked to the old wooden chest that sat in the corner of the kitchen, a piece that had belonged to his grandfather and had always served as storage for items too precious to discard, but too painful to display. From the bottom of the chest, beneath layers of Martha's quilts and Jacob's baby clothes, he retrieved a metal box that Emma had never seen before. The box was military issue, dull green metal with his name stenciled on the side in white letters. PFC Samuel. Fisher, U.S. Army. Emma's eyes widened as she realized what she was seeing, evidence of a part of Samuel's life that seemed to contradict everything she knew about his peaceful Amish existence. "I've never told you about my room, Springer," Samuel said, settling back into his chair with the box on the table between them. "That's the time when young Amish adults are allowed to experience the outside world before deciding whether to commit to our way of life. Most young people use it to attend movies or drive cars, maybe work in town for a while. I used mine to enlist in the army." Samuel opened the box with reverent hands, revealing contents that spoke of a completely different life. Military insignia, faded photographs of young soldiers in combat gear, commendation letters, and a small collection of medals. Emma stared at these artifacts as if they were relics from another world entirely. "I served for 3 years, Samuel continued, his voice taking on a distant quality as he remembered. Most of it was overseas, in places where young men learned very quickly how to protect themselves and the people depending on them. I was trained in reconnaissance, in survival, in tactics that most people pray they'll never need to use." He picked up one of the photographs. A group of soldiers standing in front of a military vehicle, their faces young, but their eyes already marked by experience. Samuel's face was among them, barely recognizable beneath the military-issue haircut and serious expression. "But you're Amish," Emma said, struggling to reconcile this revelation with everything she thought she knew about Samuel's beliefs. Amish people don't fight, don't use violence. You're right, Samuel said. And when my Rumspringa ended, I had to choose between two very different ways of life. I chose peace, chose to come home and live according to our principles of nonviolence and community harmony. I met Martha, we married, and I put that other life behind me. But Emma, he reached across the table and touched her hand gently. The skills I learned, the training I received, those things don't just disappear. They're still part of who I am, even if I've chosen not to use them. Emma stared at the military memorabilia scattered across the table, her quick mind processing the implications of what Samuel was telling her. You could protect us, she said slowly. You know how to fight back against people like them. Samuel felt the weight of the choice before him, the terrible decision between his deeply held beliefs and his fierce need to protect the child who had become his daughter in every way that mattered. For 3 years, he had struggled with questions about God's plan, about why good people suffered while evil seemed to flourish unchecked. Now he faced a test of faith that was even more challenging. Could he reconcile his commitment to peace with his obligation to defend the innocent? I could, he said quietly, but using violence even to protect you would mean abandoning principles that have guided my entire adult life. It would mean becoming something I swore I would never be again. Emma's voice was small when she spoke. What if they come anyway? What if they don't just want me back? What if they want to hurt me to make sure I never tell anyone what I saw? Samuel felt something cold and hard crystallize in his chest, a resolve that had been building since the moment Emma had first told him about the danger she faced. Then they'll have to go through me first, he said, and his voice carried a finality that made Emma's eyes widen. Emma, I need you to understand something. I failed to protect Martha and Jacob because their danger came from someone else's carelessness, someone I couldn't anticipate or prepare for. But this threat, these people who want to hurt you, they're making a conscious choice to target a child who has already suffered enough. That's not God's mysterious plan at work. That's human evil, and sometimes human evil has to be met with human strength. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of a buggy approaching the house interrupted their discussion. Samuel moved to the window and felt both relief and apprehension when he recognized Isaac Stoltzfus climbing down from his buggy, his weathered face creased with concern. Isaac had been Samuel's closest friend since childhood, one of the few people in the community who had never stopped trying to reach him during his 3 years of isolation. If anyone could be trusted with the knowledge of their current situation, it was Isaac. But involving him would mean putting another person at risk, expanding the circle of danger beyond just Samuel and Emma. Stay here, Samuel told Emma, already moving toward the door. Let me talk to Isaac alone. First, Samuel met his friend on the front porch, noting the worry lines around Isaac's kind eyes and the way his usually cheerful demeanor seemed subdued. Isaac was a big man, broad-shouldered from years of farm work, with the kind of steady reliability that made him a leader in their community despite his quiet nature. Samuel, Isaac said without preamble, there were strangers in town yesterday, asking questions about you and the girl. English men, well-dressed but hard-looking, the kind who made folks uncomfortable just by being there. He paused, studying Samuel's face. They wanted to know about your routines, about when you came to town, about whether the girl went with you. Shop owners didn't like their questions, but they were scared enough to answer them anyway. Samuel felt his heart sink as Isaac's words confirmed his worst fears. The people threatening Emma weren't just making idle threats. They were actively gathering intelligence, preparing for some kind of action. The photographs in the morning's envelope suddenly took on even more sinister implications, evidence of a surveillance operation that was far more sophisticated than Samuel had hoped. Isaac, Samuel said carefully, I need to tell you something. But first I need your word that you'll keep this between us, at least until we decide how to handle it. Isaac's weathered face grew even more serious. "You have it. What's going on, Samuel?" Samuel told his friend everything about Emma's past, about what she had witnessed, about the threats and the photographs, and the impossible choice between his peaceful principles and his need to protect the child who had become his daughter. Isaac listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When Samuel finished, Isaac was quiet for a long moment, staring out across the peaceful farmland that suddenly seemed less secure than it had that morning. "Samuel," he said finally, "you know I believe in our ways, in the principle of turning the other cheek and trusting in God's protection. But I also know that sometimes God expects us to be the instruments of His protection, especially when it comes to defending those who cannot defend themselves." The validation of his internal struggle, coming from someone whose faith Samuel respected deeply, felt like a weight lifting from his shoulders. "What are you saying, Isaac?" Isaac turned to look at him directly, and Samuel saw something in his friend's eyes that reminded him of his old military comrades, a quiet determination that would not be swayed by fear or convenience. "I'm saying that child belongs to our community now, regardless of how she came to us. I'm saying that any threat to her is a threat to all of us. And I'm saying that if you need help protecting her, you won't be facing this alone." As the two men stood together on the porch, united in their commitment to protect Emma despite the personal cost, Samuel felt a strength growing within him that had nothing to do with his old military training and everything to do with the power of community, of people choosing to stand together against darkness. The path ahead was still uncertain, still fraught with moral complexities and physical dangers, but for the first time since receiving the threatening photographs, Samuel began to believe that they might find a way through this crisis that would preserve both Emma's safety and his own integrity. The discovery came by accident, as most life-changing revelations do. Emma had been helping Samuel organize the storage area beneath the stairs, a cramped space that had become a repository for items too useful to discard, but too infrequently needed to keep in plain sight. As she carefully moved aside boxes of Martha's preserves and stacks of old farming magazines, her small hands encountered something unexpected. A bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, hidden behind a collection of unused mason jars. "Samuel!" Emma called from within the cramped space, her voice muffled but curious. "There are some old letters back here. Should I leave them alone?" Samuel's response from the kitchen was distracted, his attention focused on repairing a broken harness. "Bring them out if you want. Probably just old correspondence from relatives." But when Emma emerged from the storage space and placed the bundle in Samuel's hands, he went very still. The ribbon was one Martha had used for her sewing projects, and the return address on the topmost envelope was from the U.S. Army Personnel Command. These were not family letters. These were official military communications from a time in his life he had thought was safely buried in the past. Emma watched Samuel's face carefully as he stared at the bundle, noting the way his jaw tightened and his weathered hands trembled slightly. She had learned to read the subtle signs of adult distress during her years in foster care, and she recognized that whatever these letters contained, they represented something significant and potentially painful for Samuel. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to find something private. I can put them back." "No," Samuel interrupted, his voice thoughtful rather than upset. "Maybe it's time these came to light again. Maybe there are things in my past that could help us with our current situation." Samuel untied the ribbon with careful fingers, revealing a collection of letters, commendations, and official documents that chronicled a period of his life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. There were letters of commendation from his commanding officers, recognition for service above and beyond the call of duty. There were photographs he had forgotten he possessed, images of himself and his unit in various locations, their faces marked by the particular weariness that comes from carrying responsibilities beyond their years. But it was the final letter in the bundle that made Samuel's breath catch in his throat. It was from Colonel James Mitchell, his former commanding officer, and it was dated less than 2 years ago, long after Samuel had returned to his Amish life and married Martha. "Samuel," Emma said softly, noting his reaction to the letter. "What is it?" Samuel opened the letter with hands that shook slightly, his eyes scanning the familiar military formatting and precise language. What he read there changed his understanding of his own capabilities and the resources that might be available to him in protecting Emma. "My dear Samuel," the letter began, "I hope this correspondence finds you well and at peace in your chosen life. I'm writing because circumstances have arisen that remind me of your exceptional service and the unique skills you possessed during your time under my command. While I respect your commitment to your current path, I wanted you to know that certain resources remain available to you should you ever find yourself in need of assistance that falls outside the normal channels of civilian law enforcement. The network of relationships you helped build during your service, relationships with people who understand the sometimes complex nature of protecting the innocent, remains strong. Should you ever face a situation where conventional help is insufficient, please know that a single phone call to the number below would bring assistance from people who remember your service and would consider it an honor to return the favor. The letter went on to provide contact information and a secure communication protocol, along with assurances that any request for help would be handled with complete discretion and with respect for Samuel's current way of life. Emma watched Samuel's face as he read, noting the way his expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like hope, mixed with apprehension. "Samuel, what does it say?" Samuel looked up at her, and Emma could see him wrestling with some internal conflict. "It's from my old commanding officer," he said slowly. "He's telling me that if I ever need help, the kind of help that regular police can't provide, there are people who would assist us because of service I provided years ago." Emma's eyes widened as she began to understand the implications. "You mean there are people who could protect us from the men who are threatening me? People who know how to deal with criminals?" "Yes," Samuel said, but his voice carried uncertainty rather than relief. "But accepting that help would mean involving people in violence, potentially asking them to do things that go against everything I believe about peaceful resolution of conflict." Emma was quiet for a moment, her young mind grappling with concepts that would challenge adults twice her age. "Samuel," she said finally, "what if you're not asking them to be violent? What if you're asking them to prevent violence by protecting someone who can't protect herself?" The simplicity of her logic struck Samuel like a physical blow. In his struggle to reconcile his pacifist beliefs with his protective instincts, he had perhaps been making the situation more complicated than it needed to be. The men threatening Emma were already committed to violence. They had made that clear in their message and their surveillance activities. Accepting help to defend against that violence might not be the same as initiating aggression. Before Samuel could respond to Emma's observation, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching the farm interrupted their conversation. Samuel moved quickly to the window and felt his heart sink as he saw 2 black SUVs pulling into his yard, their tinted windows and aggressive styling clearly marking them as vehicles that didn't belong in the peaceful countryside of Lancaster County. "Emma," Samuel said, his voice sharp with urgency, "go upstairs to Jacob's room, your room, and lock the door. Don't come down no matter what you hear, and don't show yourself at the windows." Emma's face went pale, but she moved immediately toward the stairs, her survival instincts honed by years of dangerous situations. As she reached the bottom step, she turned back to Samuel with fear and determination warring in her dark eyes. "Be careful," she whispered. "And Samuel, whatever you have to do to stay safe, Jacob would understand. And so would Martha." Samuel felt a surge of love and gratitude for this child who was trying to give him permission to abandon his principles in order to protect them both. As Emma disappeared upstairs, Samuel moved to the kitchen and retrieved the letter from Colonel Mitchell. along with the secure phone number it contained. He had perhaps minutes before the men outside decided to approach the house, and he needed to make a decision that would determine the course of the rest of their lives. The front door was solid oak, installed by Samuel's grandfather decades ago, but Samuel could hear voices outside now, low, professional tones that spoke of men accustomed to intimidation and violence. They were discussing strategy, deciding how to approach the situation to achieve maximum psychological impact. Samuel thought of Emma upstairs, probably sitting on Jacob's bed and clutching the wooden horse for comfort. Terrified, but trying to be brave for his sake. He thought of Martha's gentle voice, always encouraging him to choose love over fear, compassion over anger. He thought of Jacob's innocent laughter and the way the boy had trusted his father to keep him safe from all the dangers of the world. And then he thought of the men outside, people who preyed on children, who used fear and violence to silence witnesses to their crimes, who would hurt a 10-year-old girl simply to protect their own interests. Samuel picked up the phone and dialed the number from Colonel Mitchell's letter. The voice that answered was crisp and professional, clearly accustomed to unusual requests at unusual hours. "Secure line. How may I assist you?" "This is Samuel Fisher," Samuel said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Colonel Mitchell told me I could call this number if I needed help protecting someone innocent." There was a brief pause, then the sound of computer keys clicking rapidly. "Samuel Fisher, formerly PFC Fisher, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion. Yes, sir, we have your file. What's your situation?" Samuel looked toward the stairs where Emma was hiding, then toward the front door, where dangerous men were preparing to enter his home uninvited. "I have a 10-year-old girl who witnessed criminal activity and is being threatened by people who want to silence her. They're outside my house right now, and local law enforcement isn't equipped to handle this level of threat." "Understood, sir. We can have a response team to your location in 15 minutes. Can you maintain your position until then?" Samuel thought about his 3 cows in the barn, his chickens pecking peacefully in the yard, the simple life he had built based on principles of nonviolence and trust in God's protection. Then he thought about Emma's terrified face and her desperate need for someone to stand between her and the people who would hurt her. "Yes," he said, "we'll hold our position." As Samuel hung up the phone and prepared to face whatever came next, he realized that his faith hadn't been abandoned. It had simply evolved. Sometimes protecting the innocent required more than prayers and good intentions. Sometimes it required the courage to accept help from unexpected sources, to trust that God's protection might come through the hands of people who had chosen to dedicate their lives to standing between the vulnerable and those who would harm them. The wooden cross on his kitchen wall seemed to shine with a different light now, not mocking his struggles with faith and violence, but reminding him that even divine love sometimes required sacrifice, sometimes required standing firm against evil, regardless of the personal cost. Outside, the voices grew louder, more impatient. Samuel checked the locks on his doors, made sure the curtains were drawn, and settled into his rocking chair to wait for help to arrive. In 15 minutes, he would discover whether his decision to call for assistance had been an act of wisdom or an abandonment of everything he claimed to believe. But looking up at Jacob's empty room, knowing that Emma was up there, depending on him to keep her safe, Samuel felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Martha and Jacob's death, he was taking action to protect someone he loved, refusing to be passive in the face of threat. Whether that action aligned perfectly with his religious principles or not, it felt like the most faithful thing he had done in years. The 15 minutes felt like hours, but Samuel could hear the difference when help arrived, the sound of vehicles moving with purpose rather than threat, the crisp efficiency of trained professionals taking control of a dangerous situation. Through his front window, Samuel caught glimpses of movement as the response team established positions around his property, their presence transforming the atmosphere from one of impending violence to one of controlled security. A knock at his door, 3 sharp raps, followed by 2 softer ones, the pattern Colonel Mitchell's letter had indicated would identify legitimate assistance, prompted Samuel to unlock the heavy oak door. The man standing on his porch looked nothing like the stereotypical image of military or law enforcement. He was perhaps 40 years old, dressed in simple civilian clothes that would blend into any rural community. His manner calm and respectful rather than aggressive. "Mr. Fisher, I'm Agent Martinez. We've secured your immediate perimeter, and the individuals who were threatening you have been discouraged from continuing their surveillance." His voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to handling dangerous situations with minimal drama. "Is the child you mentioned safe?" "Emma's upstairs," Samuel replied, stepping back to allow the agent into his kitchen. "She's been through enough trauma already. I don't want her more frightened than she already is." Agent Martinez nodded approvingly. "We'll keep this as low-key as possible. May I ask you to call her down? We need to understand the full scope of what she witnessed in order to provide appropriate protection." Samuel climbed the stairs to Emma's room, finding her sitting exactly where he had imagined, on Jacob's bed, clutching the wooden horse, her dark eyes wide with fear and hope in equal measure. When he told her it was safe to come downstairs, that help had arrived, she looked at him with the kind of desperate trust that made his heart ache. "Are they gone?" she whispered. "The bad men?" "They're gone," Samuel assured her, "and the good men who came to help us want to talk to you to understand how we can keep you safe permanently." Emma followed Samuel downstairs, staying close to his side as they entered the kitchen where Agent Martinez waited. The agent had positioned himself casually at the kitchen table, his manner more like a family friend than an official investigator, clearly understanding that gaining Emma's trust was crucial to getting the information he needed. "Hello, Emma," Martinez said gently. "I'm Agent Martinez, and I work with people who help protect children who have seen dangerous things. Mr. Fisher tells me you've been very brave, but that some bad people have been trying to scare you." Emma glanced at Samuel for reassurance before settling into the chair beside him. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to see," she said quietly, "and now they want to hurt me so I won't tell anyone about it." Agent Martinez leaned forward slightly, his expression encouraging rather than demanding. "Can you tell me what you saw, Emma? The more we understand about these people, the better we can protect you." Over the next hour, Emma recounted her experiences in careful detail: the foster home where she had been placed, the criminal activity she had witnessed, the threats that had forced her to flee. Agent Martinez listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, but never pushing for more information than Emma was comfortable providing. When Emma finished her account, Agent Martinez was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of what she had described. "Emma," he said finally, "what you witnessed was part of a larger investigation that several agencies have been working on for months. The information you can provide is extremely valuable, but more importantly, you deserve to be safe while we use that information to stop these people." Samuel felt a surge of hope. "Does that mean you can protect her, that she won't have to keep running?" "We can certainly protect her," Martinez confirmed. "But there's something else you both should know. Emma, the woman who came to your previous foster home, claiming to be investigating your case, she wasn't a legitimate social worker." Emma's face went pale. "What do you mean?" Agent Martinez consulted his notes. "We've been tracking a woman named Linda Patterson, who has been working with the criminal organization you witnessed. She's been posing as various officials, social workers, court advocates, family services investigators, in order to locate and manipulate children who might pose a threat to her employers." The name Patterson struck Samuel like physical blow, and he saw Emma's reaction was even more dramatic. She gasped as if she had been punched, her small hands flying to her throat. "Patterson," Emma whispered, "that's my last name, the name on all my official papers." Agent Martinez nodded grimly. Linda Patterson has been claiming to be your biological mother, using forged documentation to gain access to your files and your placement information. She's the one who arranged for you to be placed in the foster home where you witnessed the criminal activity, and she's been coordinating the efforts to find and silence you. Samuel felt the world shift around him as the implications became clear. The woman who had been claiming to be Emma's mother was actually one of the criminals, someone who had been manipulating the system to put Emma in danger rather than protect her. The child sitting beside him had been betrayed not just by foster families and social workers, but by someone claiming the most fundamental relationship of all. "She's not my real mother?" Emma asked, her voice small and confused. "We don't believe." "So," Martinez said gently, "the documentation she's been using appears to be sophisticated forgeries. We're still investigating your actual parentage, but what we can tell you for certain is that Linda Patterson is not who she claims to be, and her interest in you has nothing to do with maternal affection." Emma turned to look at Samuel, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of relief and renewed fear. "If she's not my real mother, then who am I? Where did I come from?" Samuel reached over and took her small hand in his weathered one, feeling the tremor of fear and confusion that ran through her small frame. "You're Emma Fisher," he said firmly. "You're my daughter, the child who brought light back into my life, the girl who taught me how to hope again. Whatever your biological origins, whoever your birth parents might have been, you belong here with me." Agent Martinez watched this exchange with professional interest and personal approval. "Actually, Mr. Fisher, that brings up an important point. Emma's legal status is complicated by the fraudulent documentation that's been created around her case. With your permission, we can expedite legitimate adoption proceedings that would give you full legal custody and provide Emma with the security of knowing she truly belongs somewhere." Samuel felt tears prick at his eyes as he realized what the agent was offering. Not just protection from immediate danger, but a legal framework that would make Emma officially and permanently his daughter. "Is that what you want, Emma?" he asked. "To be legally adopted? To have this be your real home forever?" Emma's answer came without hesitation, despite the tears streaming down her face. "More than anything," she whispered, "you're the only person who ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere." Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out Martha's wedding ring, the simple gold band that had been his wife's most treasured possession. He had been carrying it with him for weeks, unsure of the right moment or the right words, but now everything seemed clear. "Emma Louise Fisher," he said, slipping the ring onto her small finger where it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "In front of God and this witness, I claim you as my daughter, and I promise that no one will ever make you feel unwanted or unsafe again." Emma threw her arms around Samuel's neck, sobbing with relief and joy and the overwhelming emotion of finally, truly belonging somewhere. Samuel held her close, feeling the last pieces of his broken heart heal as this child, his child, trusted him with her complete vulnerability. But Agent Martinez's expression remained serious despite the emotional moment unfolding before him. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said gently, "but there's something else you both need to know. Our surveillance indicates that Linda Patterson is en route to this location with a team of associates. She's obtained what appears to be legal custody. Documentation, forged but sophisticated enough to fool local law enforcement, and she's planning to collect Emma within the next few hours." Samuel felt ice form in his veins. "She's coming here? She's counting on the local sheriff's office to assist her in what appears to be a legitimate custody retrieval," Martinez explained. "Unless we can expose the fraudulent nature of her documentation, she'll have legal authority to take Emma, and anyone who interferes will be guilty of obstruction." Emma's grip on Samuel tightened. "She can't take me," she whispered. "Please don't let her take me." Samuel looked at Agent Martinez with desperate hope. Can you stop her? Can you prove the documents are fake before she gets here?" Martinez checked his phone and frowned. "Our forensic document specialists are working on it, but sophisticated forgeries take time to expose definitively. We might have enough to cast doubt on her claims, but we probably won't have absolute proof before she arrives." The sound of vehicles approaching the farm once again sent chills through Samuel's heart. But this time, Agent Martinez moved to the window with professional calm. "That's her," he confirmed. "Linda Patterson, along with 2 associates and what appears to be a sheriff's deputy." Samuel felt the weight of the choice before him: surrender Emma to people who intended to harm her, or resist what appeared to be legal authority and risk being arrested for kidnapping. Neither option offered any guarantee of Emma's safety, and both required him to trust in outcomes beyond his control. "Emma," he said, kneeling down to look into her eyes, "whatever happens in the next few minutes, remember that you are my daughter, that this is your home, and that I will never stop fighting to bring you back here where you belong." Emma nodded bravely, Martha's wedding ring catching the afternoon sunlight as she wiped away her tears. "I know, Papa," she said, using the word for the first time, "and I'll never stop believing you'll find a way to save me." As the knock came at the door, authoritative and impatient rather than respectful, Samuel realized that all their preparation, all their planning, was about to be tested in ways none of them had anticipated. The woman, claiming to be Emma's mother, was here to collect her prize, armed with legal documents and official support, ready to complete a deception that had been months in the making. But Emma was no longer the frightened, abandoned child who had appeared at his gate in a storm. She was Emma Fisher now, his daughter, protected by love and community and the fierce determination of people who had chosen to stand against evil regardless of the personal cost. Whatever happened next, she would not face it alone. The knock at the door came with the unmistakable authority of law enforcement, but Samuel had learned to distinguish between legitimate authority and authority being manipulated for illegitimate purposes. Agent Martinez positioned himself near the kitchen window, where he could observe the interaction while remaining out of sight, his hand resting casually near his concealed weapon. "Emma," Samuel said quietly, "go to the sitting room and stay there. Unless I call for you, no matter what you hear, don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Emma nodded, her small face set with determined courage that reminded Samuel powerfully of Martha's quiet strength in times of crisis. As she moved toward the sitting room, Samuel saw her touch Martha's ring on her finger, drawing strength from this tangible symbol of belonging and protection. Samuel opened the door to find exactly what Agent Martinez had predicted: a sheriff's deputy in full uniform, his expression uncomfortable but official, flanked by 3 civilians. The deputy was young, probably new to the job, and clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but committed to following proper procedures. Behind him stood Linda Patterson, a woman in her 30s with Emma's dark hair but none of her warmth. Her face hard, with the kind of determination that came from desperation rather than genuine concern. "Mr. Fisher," the deputy said, consulting a clipboard full of official-looking documents, "I'm Deputy Hanson with the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. I have a court order here requiring you to release Emma Patterson into the custody of her legal guardian, Linda Patterson." He gestured toward the woman behind him. "I understand this might be difficult, but the law is clear in cases of custodial interference." Samuel felt his heart sink as he realized how sophisticated this deception really was. Linda Patterson had not only forged custody documents, but had somehow managed to get them filed through official channels, creating the appearance of legitimate legal authority. Resisting would make him appear to be the criminal, while complying would place Emma directly into the hands of people who intended to harm her. "Deputy Hanson," Samuel said carefully, "I appreciate your commitment to following proper procedures, but I have reason to believe that these documents may not be legitimate. This child has been living with me for several weeks, and she's expressed serious concerns about returning to Ms. Patterson's custody. Linda Patterson stepped forward, her voice taking on the practiced tone of someone accustomed to manipulating authority figures. Officer, Mr. Fisher has been harboring my daughter illegally. Emma is a troubled child with a history of running away and making false accusations against the adults trying to help her. She's been missing for over a month, and I've been working with social services to locate her. Deputy Hanson looked uncomfortable with the conflicting accounts, but his training clearly emphasized following documented legal procedures rather than making judgment calls about family dynamics. Mr. Fisher, I understand your concern, but I have valid court documents requiring Emma's return to her legal guardian. If you believe there are legitimate issues with custody, those need to be addressed through proper legal channels. Samuel felt the trap closing around them. Linda Patterson had created a scenario where resisting appeared to be criminal obstruction, while complying would place Emma in mortal danger. The system was being used against itself, legal procedures twisted to facilitate rather than prevent child endangerment. From the sitting room, Emma's voice carried clearly through the quiet farmhouse. "I'm not going with her," she said, her young voice steady, despite the fear Samuel knew she must be feeling. "She's not my real mother, and she's not here to help me. She's here because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." Linda Patterson's mask of maternal concern slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Emma, sweetheart, you're confused. You've been through a lot of trauma, and it's made you imagine things that aren't real. I'm here to take you home where you'll get the help you need." Emma appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, Martha's ring catching the afternoon light as she held Jacob's wooden horse against her chest. "If you're really my mother," she said, her dark eyes fixed on Linda Patterson's face, "then tell me about my favorite food when I was little, or what song you used to sing to me, or what happened to the scar on my left knee." Linda Patterson hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Samuel to see that she had no answers to Emma's questions, no real knowledge of the child she claimed to have raised. "Emma, you were very young when you went into foster care. It's natural that you wouldn't remember everything clearly," but Emma pressed on with the fearless logic of childhood. "Then tell me my middle name. Tell me when my birthday is. Tell me anything a real mother would know about her own child." The silence stretched uncomfortably as Linda Patterson struggled to answer questions that should have been simple for any legitimate parent. Deputy Hanson's expression began to shift from official confidence to professional doubt, his trained instincts recognizing that something was not as straightforward as the paperwork suggested. Agent Martinez chose that moment to make his presence known, stepping into the kitchen with his credentials already visible. "Deputy Hanson, I'm Agent Martinez with a federal task force investigating child trafficking and document fraud. I need you to know that the custody documents you're carrying are currently being examined by federal forensic specialists for evidence of forgery." Deputy Hanson's relief at the appearance of higher authority was visible. "Agent Martinez, are you saying these documents aren't legitimate?" "I'm saying they're part of an ongoing investigation into a criminal organization that uses fraudulent legal documentation to gain access to children who have witnessed criminal activities," Martinez replied. "Emma Patterson, or rather Emma Fisher, as she's been legally known in our system, is a protected witness in a federal case." Linda Patterson's carefully constructed facade began to crumble as she realized her plan was falling apart. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice losing its practiced maternal tone and taking on something harder, more desperate. "Emma is my daughter, and I have every right to take her home. You can't just make up federal cases to interfere with legitimate custody issues." Martinez produced a folder from his jacket and handed it to Deputy Hanson. "These are the preliminary results of our document analysis, along with evidence that the woman calling herself Linda Patterson has been using multiple identities to access child welfare systems across 3 states. Her real name is Linda Kozlov, and she's wanted in connection with several federal crimes. As Deputy Hanson examined the documents, Samuel watched Linda Kozlov's face transform from fake maternal concern to something approaching panic. The two men who had accompanied her shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the situation had taken. "Emma," Samuel said gently, "come stand beside me." Emma moved to Samuel's side without hesitation, her small hand finding his as she pressed close to him for protection. The gesture was not lost on Deputy Hanson, who had clearly noted the difference between Emma's fear of Linda Kozlov and her trust in Samuel. "Ma'am," Deputy Hanson said to Linda Kozlov, "I'm going to need you to accompany me to the station while we sort out these conflicting claims. Agent Martinez, I'll need you to provide official documentation of this federal investigation." Linda Kozlov's desperation became palpable as she realized her carefully planned deception was unraveling. "You don't understand," she said, her voice taking on a threatening tone that revealed her true nature. "This girl is more dangerous than she appears. She's witnessed things that could destroy people's lives, and there are others who won't be as patient as we've been in resolving this situation." The threat hung in the air like a physical presence, and Samuel felt Emma's grip on his hand tighten. Agent Martinez stepped closer to Linda Kozlov, his casual demeanor replaced by professional alertness. "Ms. Kozlov," Martinez said, "I'm placing you under arrest for attempted kidnapping, document fraud, and making terroristic threats against a minor. You have the right to remain silent." But Linda Kozlov was not finished. As Agent Martinez began to read her rights, she pulled out her cell phone and made a brief call. "Plan B," she said simply, then ended the call and smiled at Samuel with cold malice. "You think you've won, but this is just the beginning. Emma knows things that very powerful people need to keep secret, and they won't be deterred by federal agents or adoption papers or your simple Amish faith." Agent Martinez quickly took her phone and gestured for Deputy Hanson to take her into custody, but the damage was done. Linda Kozlov had just signaled to her criminal associates that their original plan had failed and that more aggressive action was required. As Deputy Hanson escorted Linda Kozlov and her companions away from the farm, Agent Martinez turned to Samuel with grim seriousness. "Mr. Fisher, that phone call means we're now dealing with a much more dangerous situation. The people behind this operation know that their legal approach has failed, and they're likely to try more direct methods of silencing Emma." Samuel felt Emma trembling beside him and knelt down to look into her frightened eyes. "Emma, sweetheart, I need you to be very brave for just a little while longer. The bad people are getting desperate, which means they might try something foolish. But you're not alone, and you're not helpless, and we're going to make sure you're safe." Emma nodded, her young face set with determination that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "What do we do now, Papa?" Samuel stood and looked at Agent Martinez, then at the peaceful farmland around them that might soon become a battleground. "We get ready to protect what matters most," he said. "And we trust that sometimes God's protection comes through the hands of people willing to stand between evil and innocence." As the afternoon shadows lengthened across Samuel's farm, the three of them began preparations for what might be the final confrontation in Emma's long journey towards safety and belonging. The community that had slowly embraced Emma as one of their own was about to be tested in ways none of them had anticipated, but Samuel felt a quiet confidence that they would not face this test alone. The handmade quilt that the women of the community had been secretly creating for Emma lay finished in Ruth Yoder's house, ready to be presented as a symbol of acceptance and belonging. Soon, Emma might need that physical reminder of her place in the community more than anyone had imagined. The attack came at dusk, during the quiet hour when Samuel would normally be settling his animals for the night and Emma would be helping with the evening chores. Agent Martinez had positioned additional security around the farm, but the criminals had clearly studied their routines and chosen their moment for maximum confusion and psychological impact. Samuel was in the barn when he heard the first sounds of trouble, not gunshots or shouting, but the more subtle indicators of professional infiltration. Animals becoming restless without apparent cause, the almost inaudible sound of feet moving where they shouldn't be, the sensation of being watched by hostile eyes. His military training, dormant for so many years, awakened with startling clarity. Emma was in the kitchen, wearing Jacob's small wooden cross on a chain around her neck. Samuel's gift to her that morning, a symbol of the faith that connected them across the boundary between life and death. When Samuel burst through the kitchen door, his face tense with urgency, she immediately understood that their peaceful interlude was over. "Emma, we need to go. Now." Samuel's voice was calm but firm, the tone of someone accustomed to giving orders in dangerous situations. "Take only what you can carry in your pockets and stay close to me no matter what happens." Emma nodded, her small hands automatically checking for Martha's ring and Jacob's wooden cross, the two physical anchors that connected her to her new family. She had learned during her years of uncertainty that material possessions could be lost or taken away, but symbols of love and belonging were worth protecting above all else. As they moved toward the back door, Agent Martinez appeared from the shadows of the sitting room, his professional demeanor now replaced by the focused intensity of someone preparing for combat. "Mr. Fisher, we have at least 6 hostiles approaching from multiple directions. They're using sophisticated equipment and coordinated tactics. This isn't a desperate attempt by small-time criminals. Someone with serious resources is behind this operation." Samuel felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over him, the burden of protecting someone vulnerable while facing an enemy with superior numbers and equipment. But this time was different from his military service. This time he was fighting not for abstract strategic objectives, but for the life of the child who had become his daughter, for the future of the family they had built together. "How do we get her out safely?" Samuel asked, his mind automatically calculating escape routes and defensive positions. "The main roads are likely compromised," Martinez replied, "but your knowledge of the local terrain gives us advantages they don't expect. Is there a way to reach your neighbors without using the main paths?" Samuel thought quickly, his mind mapping the network of farm trails and creek beds that connected his property to the rest of the Amish community. Through the back pasture to Isaac's farm, then along the creek to Bishop Eli's house. They wouldn't expect us to move toward the community instead of away from it. Agent Martinez nodded approvingly. "Sometimes hiding in plain sight is the best strategy. But Mr. Fisher, I need you to understand, if they corner us, I may not be able to resolve this situation without violence. Are you prepared for that possibility?" Samuel looked down at Emma, who was watching their conversation with the intensity of someone whose life depended on adult decisions she couldn't control. He thought of Martha's gentle voice, always encouraging him to choose peace over conflict, to trust in God's protection rather than human strength. He thought of Jacob's innocent laughter and the way the boy had believed his father could keep him safe from any danger. And then he thought of the men outside, people who trafficked in children's fear and pain, who would hurt Emma, not out of passion or desperation, but as a cold business decision to protect their criminal enterprise. "Agent Martinez," Samuel said quietly, "I've spent 3 years asking God why he allowed evil to destroy my family. Tonight, I think I have my answer. Sometimes God expects us to be the instruments of his justice, to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them." He touched Jacob's wooden cross that hung around Emma's neck. "My son would understand, and so would my wife." The first gunshot shattered the evening quiet, followed immediately by the sound of splintering wood as a bullet punched through the kitchen window. Emma dropped to the floor with the practiced reflexes of someone who had learned to recognize danger, while Samuel and Agent Martinez moved to defensive positions with the fluid coordination of trained professionals. "They're testing our response," Martinez observed, peering carefully through a gap in the curtains, trying to determine how many people they're facing and what kind of resistance to expect. Samuel's mind was working with the tactical clarity he hadn't accessed in decades, analyzing the situation with the cold logic of someone trained to survive combat. The barn provides good cover and has multiple exits. If we can reach it, we can use the hayloft to observe their movements while staying hidden. "Emma," Martinez said gently, "we're going to move from this house to the barn, and then to your neighbors, where you'll be safe. Can you be very quiet and do exactly what we tell you?" Emma nodded, her dark eyes bright with fear, but also with trust in the two men who were protecting her. "I'm ready," she said, her young voice steady despite the circumstances. Samuel felt a surge of pride and love for this brave child who had endured so much uncertainty and fear, yet still managed to face each new crisis with courage and dignity. She had given him back his sense of purpose, his reason for living, and he would not fail her the way he had failed to protect Martha and Jacob. The movement from house to barn required all of Samuel's knowledge of his own property, using shadows and outbuildings to mask their progress from the hostile observers who were undoubtedly watching for any sign of movement. Emma stayed between Samuel and Agent Martinez, her small form practically invisible as she moved with the careful quiet of someone who had learned stealth as a survival skill. From the hayloft, they could see the scope of the operation arrayed. Against them, 6 men in dark clothing, armed with professional equipment, moving with the coordination of people accustomed to violence as a tool of business. These were not desperate criminals acting from panic. They were professionals executing a planned operation to eliminate a threat to their organization. "Emma," Samuel whispered, "I need you to listen very carefully. See that trail through the back pasture? If something happens to Agent Martinez and me, if we can't go with you, I want you to follow that trail all the way to Isaac's farm. Tell him what's happening and he'll protect you." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "I'm not leaving without you, Papa. We're a family now, and families stay together." Samuel felt his heart break and heal simultaneously at her words. This child, who had spent her entire life being abandoned by the adults responsible for protecting her, was now refusing to abandon the adult who had finally offered her unconditional love and security. "Emma," he said gently, "sometimes families have to be brave in different ways. If something happens to me, the most important thing you can do is stay alive and safe, because that's what I would want more than anything else." Agent Martinez was monitoring the movements of their attackers through a small pair of binoculars. "They're setting up for a coordinated assault on the house," he reported. "When they realize we're not there, they'll expand their search pattern. We probably have 5 minutes before they think to check the barn." Samuel made his decision with the clarity that comes from absolute commitment to a cause greater than oneself. "Agent Martinez, can you get Emma to Isaac's farm safely if I provide a distraction?" "What kind of distraction?" Martinez asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. Samuel touched the wooden cross around Emma's neck one last time, feeling the smooth surface that Jacob's small fingers had once caressed. The kind that gives a little girl the time she needs to reach safety, regardless of what it costs the person providing it. Emma grabbed Samuel's hand with desperate strength. "Papa, no! Please don't leave me! I can't lose another family!" Samuel knelt down to look directly into her eyes, his weathered hands framing her small face with infinite tenderness. "Emma, my brave girl, you're not losing a family. You're carrying our love with you wherever you go. And someday, when you're safe and grown up, you'll understand that the greatest privilege of my life was being your papa, even if it was only for a short time." As the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, Samuel prepared to make the sacrifice that would ensure Emma's survival, trusting that God would accept his offering and that his love for this child would be counted as worthy of the ultimate price. But Emma Fisher had not survived years of abandonment and uncertainty only to lose the first father who had ever truly wanted her. As Samuel prepared to sacrifice himself for her safety, she made a decision that would define the rest of both their lives. "Papa," she whispered, her small hand finding the rope that hung down from the barn's bell tower. "Jacob wouldn't want you to leave me either, and I know what to do." Before Samuel could stop her, Emma pulled the rope with all her strength, sending the loud, clear peal of the farm bell echoing across the peaceful countryside. It was the traditional signal used by Amish communities for generations, a call for help that every neighbor within miles would recognize and respond to without question. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Lights began appearing in farmhouses across the valley as families woke to the unmistakable sound of someone in desperate need of assistance. Samuel had forgotten about the bell, installed by his grandfather decades ago but rarely used except for ceremonial occasions. Emma's quick thinking had just summoned the entire community to their aid. "Brilliant," Agent Martinez breathed, his professional admiration evident. "They can't fight an entire community without turning this into a massacre that would bring federal attention they can't afford." The attackers outside clearly understood the implications as well. Through the barn windows, Samuel could see them clustering together in urgent consultation, their carefully planned operation suddenly complicated by the prospect of dozens of witnesses and potential defenders converging on the scene. But Emma wasn't finished demonstrating the courage and resourcefulness that had enabled her to survive on her own for so long. As the sound of buggies and farm vehicles began approaching from multiple directions, she scrambled down from the hayloft and positioned herself at the barn door. "Emma, what are you doing?" Samuel called after her, his heart stopping as he realized she was putting herself in direct danger. "They want me," Emma called back, her young voice carrying a determination that reminded Samuel powerfully of Martha's quiet strength in times of crisis. "But they want me alive, which means they won't hurt me if I go to them willingly. And that gives you and Agent Martinez the chance to stop them without anyone else getting hurt." Samuel started toward her, but Agent Martinez caught his arm. "She's right," he said quietly, "and she's buying us the time we need for backup to arrive. But Mr. Fisher, if she's going to take that risk, we need to be ready to act the moment we have an opportunity." Emma stepped out of the barn with her, hands visible and empty, walking slowly toward the group of armed men who had been sent to capture or kill her. In the growing darkness, illuminated only by the lights of the approaching community members, she looked impossibly small and vulnerable, a child facing monsters with nothing but her own courage as protection. "I'm Emma Patterson," she called, out using the name from her forged documents. "I know you've been looking for me. I'll come with you willingly, but only if you promise not to hurt the people who have been protecting me." The leader of the attack team stepped forward, his weapon lowered but ready. Samuel could see him calculating the odds, weighing the value of completing his mission against the growing complications of the situation. The sound of approaching vehicles was getting louder, and soon there would be too many witnesses for any kind of covert operation. "Smart girl," the man said. "Your cooperation will make this much easier for everyone involved." But as he reached toward Emma, she demonstrated one final lesson learned during her years of survival on the streets. Her small hand flew to her mouth, and Samuel realized with horror that she was biting down on something, probably a piece of glass or metal she had palmed from somewhere in the barn. Blood began flowing from Emma's mouth as she deliberately injured herself, making her value as a witness significantly reduced, while simultaneously creating a medical emergency that would require immediate attention and documentation. It was a desperate, dangerous gambit that could have killed her, but it effectively destroyed the attacker's primary objective of taking her alive and unharmed. "Now!" Agent Martinez shouted, and Samuel found himself moving with the fluid precision of his military training, his body remembering skills he had thought were permanently buried beneath years of peaceful farming. The next few minutes were a chaos of movement, shouting, and the arrival of Samuel's neighbors armed with farm tools, and righteous determination to protect one of their own. Isaac Stoltzfus led the charge, his normally peaceful demeanor transformed into something fierce and protective as he saw Emma bleeding and surrounded by armed strangers. Bishop Eli arrived with half a dozen younger men from the community, their usual commitment to non-violence temporarily set aside in the face of a direct threat to a child they had come to love. Ruth Yoder was there with the community's women, ready to provide medical assistance and moral support. The professional criminals found themselves outnumbered 20-1 by people who might not have military training, but who had generations of experience in protecting their own against outside threats. Agent Martinez moved with lethal efficiency, his federal authority and tactical training allowing him to coordinate the community's response while ensuring that Emma's injuries received immediate attention. The attackers, faced with the choice between completing their mission and avoiding a massacre that would bring unwanted federal scrutiny, chose retreat over confrontation. "This isn't over," the team leader called out as they withdrew to their vehicles. "The girl knows things that powerful people can't afford to have revealed. She'll never be safe as long as she's alive to testify." But Samuel, holding Emma as Ruth, Yoda tended to her self-inflicted injuries, felt a strength and determination he hadn't experienced since his military service. "Then those powerful people will have to go through an entire community to reach her," he replied, his voice carrying across the farmyard with quiet authority. "And they'll discover that people fighting to protect their children are more dangerous than any professional soldiers." Emma looked up at Samuel through her tears and pain, Martha's wedding ring still secure on her finger, Jacob's wooden cross still hanging around her neck. "Did we win, Papa?" she whispered. Samuel looked around at the faces of his community, people who had driven through the night to answer a child's call for help, who had set aside their commitment to pacifism to protect someone they loved, who had demonstrated that belonging to a family meant never having to face danger alone. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion and pride. "We won. And more importantly, you're never going to have to fight alone again." As the sounds of sirens approached in the distance, backup called by Agent Martinez to ensure that the attackers were apprehended and charged, Samuel realized that Emma had not only saved herself through her courage and quick thinking, but had also saved him. She had shown him that healing from loss didn't mean forgetting the past, but rather finding new ways to love and protect and belong. Bishop Eli approached Samuel as Ruth finished bandaging Emma's mouth, his weathered face reflecting both concern and approval. "Samuel," he said quietly, "the child has shown us all what it means to have faith, not just faith in God's protection, but faith in the power of community to stand against evil when standing is required." Isaac nodded in agreement, his big hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. "She's one of us now, completely and forever. Anyone who threatens her threatens all of us." Emma managed a small smile despite her injuries, and Samuel could see that she finally understood what she had been searching for all her life, not just a place to belong, but people willing to fight for her right to belong there. The handmade quilt that Ruth had been secretly creating lay waiting in the buggy, ready to be presented as a tangible symbol of acceptance and love. As federal agents arrived to process the scene and take statements, Samuel held Emma close and realized that their story was not ending but beginning. The threats against her would continue until the criminal organization was completely dismantled, but they would face those challenges as a family, supported by a community that had proven its commitment to protecting its own. Emma Fisher, no longer Patterson, no longer a ward of the state, no longer alone in the world, had found her home at last. And Samuel Fisher had found his reason to live again, not by forgetting his grief, but by transforming it into love for someone who needed him as much as he needed her. 6 months later, the morning sun cast the same gentle light across Samuel Fisher's kitchen table, but everything else had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The hand-drawn family portrait that Emma had created hung in a place of honor beside the photographs of Martha and Jacob, not replacing them, but joining them in a celebration of love that transcended the boundaries between past and present. Loss and healing. In the drawing, executed with the careful attention to detail that had become Emma's signature, 4 figures stood together in front of the farmhouse, Samuel and Emma in the foreground, holding hands and smiling, while the translucent figures of Martha and Jacob stood behind them, their presence blessing rather than haunting the new family that had grown from the ashes of the old. Emma's legal adoption had been finalized the previous week, a ceremony that had brought tears to the eyes of everyone present as Judge Patricia Williams officially declared that Emma Louise Patterson was, now and forever, Emma Louise Fisher, daughter of Samuel Fisher, member of the Amish community of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Agent Martinez had attended the ceremony in civilian clothes, his presence a reminder of how far they had all traveled from those dangerous days when Emma's survival had hung in the balance. The criminal organization that had threatened her had been completely dismantled, its leaders facing federal charges that would ensure they could never again use children as tools in their illegal enterprises. The testimony you provided, Emma, Martinez had told her after the adoption ceremony, helped us save 17 other children who were being exploited by that network. Your courage didn't just protect you, it protected a lot of other kids who needed someone to speak up for them. Emma had smiled at the news, but Samuel could see that what mattered most to her was not the larger impact of her bravery, but the simple fact that she now had a permanent place in the world, a family name that no one could take away from her, and a community that had proven its commitment to protecting her. The integration into Amish life had not been without its challenges. Emma's experience with modern technology and her knowledge of the outside world sometimes created awkward moments in community committed to simple living and separation from worldly influences. But her genuine desire to belong, combined with the community's acceptance of her unique background, had created a bridge between 2 very different worlds. Ruth Yoder had become Emma's unofficial grandmother, teaching her the traditional arts of quilting, canning, and herb gardening, with the patience of someone who understood that these skills represented more than practical knowledge. They were pathways to belonging, ways of connecting with generations of women who had found meaning and purpose in caring for their families and communities. Bishop Eli had worked with Emma to understand the spiritual foundations of their faith, recognizing that her journey to belief would be different from that of children raised within the community from birth. Her questions about suffering, about why good people endured pain while evil often seemed to prosper, had challenged him to articulate his own faith in deeper and more nuanced ways. Emma, he had told her during one of their regular discussions, your experiences have given you wisdom that many adults never acquire. You understand that faith is not about avoiding difficulty, but about finding meaning and hope in the midst of difficulty. That's a gift you bring to all of us. Isaac Stoltzfus had taken on the role of Emma's unofficial uncle, teaching her the practical skills of farming with the same joy he had once brought to teaching his own children. Emma's natural affinity for animals had blossomed under his guidance, and she had become particularly skilled at training the younger horses, her gentle patience earning their trust in ways that reminded everyone of her own journey towards security and belonging. But it was in the quiet moments, the daily rhythms of life shared between father and daughter, that the deepest healing had occurred. Samuel found himself sleeping peacefully through the night, for the first time in years, no longer haunted by dreams of loss and abandonment. Emma's presence in the house had chased away the shadows that had haunted every corner since Martha and Jacob's death. Their evening conversations on the front porch had evolved from tentative exchanges between strangers to the easy communication of people who understood and accepted each other completely. Emma would share the details of her day, her progress in learning Pennsylvania Dutch, her success in mastering a particularly difficult quilting pattern, her excitement about helping Isaac deliver a foal, while Samuel would tell her about his own activities and memories. "Papa," Emma said one evening as they watched the sun set over the peaceful farmland, "do you think Martha and Jacob would be happy about us being a family?" Samuel considered the question with the thoughtfulness it deserved, looking at the wooden cross that still hung in their kitchen and thinking about the ways his understanding of love and loss had evolved over the past months. "I think," he said finally, "that Martha would be proud of how we've learned to take care of each other, and Jacob would be excited to have a big sister who could teach him about courage and adventure. I think they would understand that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, it multiplies." Emma nodded solemnly, her small fingers playing with Martha's wedding ring, which she still wore as a symbol of her connection to the family she had never met but had come to love through Samuel's stories. "I dream about them sometimes," she said quietly. "Good dreams, where they're happy and safe, and they tell me they're glad I found you when you needed someone to love." Samuel felt tears prick at his eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. "What do you tell them in these dreams?" Emma smiled, and in her expression Samuel could see traces of the frightened child who had appeared at his gate that stormy night, transformed now into someone confident in her own worth and secure in her place in the world. "I tell them that I'll take good care of you," she said, "and that I'll try to be the kind of daughter who makes them proud, even though I never got to meet them. And I tell them that because of their love for you, I learned what it feels like to be wanted and protected and cherished." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Samuel reflected on the strange and wonderful ways that healing could occur. He had lost Martha and Jacob in a moment of senseless tragedy, but their love had prepared him to recognize and nurture the love he could offer to Emma. His grief had not been eliminated. It had been transformed into something that could coexist with joy, hope, and the daily satisfaction of caring for someone who needed him. Emma had found not just a home, but an identity, not just security, but purpose. The scared, abandoned child who had once survived by trusting no one had become a young person capable of deep relationships and generous love. Her testimony had helped dismantle a criminal organization. Her courage had inspired an entire community, and her capacity for forgiveness had shown everyone around her what redemption could look like in practice. The farm that had once felt like a monument to loss now hummed with life and purpose. Emma's laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long. Her questions and observations brought fresh perspectives to daily routines that had become mechanical, and her presence transformed the house from a place of solitary grief into a true home. As they prepared to go inside for the evening, Emma paused to look at the spot where she had first stood that stormy night, desperate and alone, and hoping against hope that someone would care enough to help her. "Papa," she said, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't opened the door that night?" Samuel followed her gaze to the gate where she had waited in the rain, then looked at the thriving farm around them, at the community that had embraced them both, at the child who had given him back his reason for living. "No," he said simply, "because opening that door was the most faithful thing I've ever done, even though I didn't realize it at the time. Sometimes God's greatest gifts come disguised as the very responsibilities we think we're not ready to handle." Emma took his weathered hand in her small one, and together they walked toward the house where their family photographs waited on the mantel, where Martha's recipes lay ready to be shared, where Jacob's toys had found new purpose in bringing joy to someone who had never owned anything just for the pleasure of playing. The wooden cross in their kitchen no longer seemed like a question mark hovering over Samuel's faith. Instead, it had become what it had always been intended to be, a reminder that love could survive even death, that sacrifice could create rather than just destroy, and that sometimes the greatest miracles occurred not when suffering was prevented, but when it was transformed into something beautiful and life-giving. Emma Louise Fisher was home, and in finding her home, she had helped her father find his way back to life, back to hope, and back to a faith that could embrace both loss and love, both grief and joy, both the memory of those who had gone before and the promise of those who had come after. The storm that had brought them together had passed, but the love that had grown from their meeting would weather any future storms that might come their way. They were a family now, complete and whole and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it together.